Hello, everyone. Sometimes life itself seems to block the very act of living. You get so caught up in everything you're doing that you just go through the motions, existing but not really living. You might take a deep breath, keep pushing forward, and then realize an hour later that you haven't taken another. People often say, that's just how life is these days. But if that's true, is it worth it? Sure, having everything sounds great, but is it really worth sacrificing the essence of life itself? The incessant blinking of the microwave stuck at 11 o'clock was starting to drive me crazy. My headache wasn't helping either. You'd think that after over 20 years in Florida, I'd be used to these annoying power outages. But nope, I wasn't. Every year, I'd tell myself it was time to invest in one of those massive whole house batteries. But somehow, I never got around to it. It was always on the back burner, never quite urgent enough to prioritize. That evening, when I came home, I deliberately avoided flipping on the overhead light in the kitchen. Yet the glow from all the LED indicators on the appliances was so bright that I could have read a newspaper by it. The room was dim, quiet, and exactly how I wanted it to stay. Alone in the semi-darkness, I perched on one of those bar stools Helen had convinced me to buy. Shifting my weight to get comfortable, I muttered to myself about how they were too tall, lacked proper cushioning, and had cost 40% more than the stools I originally wanted. But, as always, I caved. I'll never really sit on these anyway, I had thought at the time. Turns out, I was wrong. Now here I was, stuck on one for over 2 hours, and I hated every minute of it. This evening's been a disaster, I thought, although technically, it wasn't evening anymore. A glance at the clock told me it was almost 2:15 a.m. Being older and a long-distance runner, I'd come to rely heavily on ice packs for recovery. After a 20 to 25-kilometer run, I'd grab a couple of frozen packs, wrap them around my Achilles tendons, and slip another pair under my sore, swollen feet. As much as I despised the cold, I hated pain even more. I hadn't even heard of plantar fasciitis until I got it, and those 3 or 4 months of dealing with it taught me the hard way what bad running shoes, pushing too hard, and skipping recovery can do to a not-so-young body. Running had become a ritual of sorts, 10 minutes on, 10 minutes off. The first 10 minutes always felt unbearable, but once the numbness started to set in, it wasn't as bad. I'd alternate between applying ice and resting, trying to limit the damage my runs caused. During Florida's colder winters, I'd sometimes skip the ice packs altogether and step into our unheated pool, shoes off and waist deep in the freezing water. It worked just as well, cooling me down from head to toe. Even in Florida, winter could be brutal sometimes, but I'd tough it out. Tonight, though, the ice wasn't under my feet. Instead, it was pressed against my hands and cheeks. The holiday season, spanning from Thanksgiving to New Year's, had always been my favorite time of year. I saved up a week of vacation every year just to enjoy it fully. Even the dreaded annual office Christmas party had become tolerable, though just barely. As a manager, I was expected to attend, make an appearance, share a meal, and mingle with coworkers before slipping away quietly. The first hour or so was always chaotic, with an open bar fueling everyone's enthusiasm or recklessness. My job was to nurse a single beer and try to keep things under control, which, to be honest, wasn't always easy. Over the last decade, I called the cops more than once, usually to deal with someone trying to drive drunk or simply overindulging. Let's just say it wasn't my favorite night of the year. Helen, my wife, used to accompany me to these events, at least until last year when she claimed to have a headache, a flimsy excuse we both knew wasn't true. I didn't press her on it. In fact, I was relieved when she told me my presence at her holiday party wasn't necessary either. There is a God, I joked to myself that night, but I couldn't have been more wrong. This year, when I asked if she wanted to come with me, she started making excuses 2 weeks in advance. I already knew the answer before I asked, "Why don't you come along with me?" She smiled and replied, "How about we skip the party and have one of our own when you get back, if it's not too late?" With an invitation like that, my original plan of leaving early was set in stone. I wasn't intending to stick around for dinner on Saturday evening, but somehow, I ended up staying anyway. Still, I managed to get home just after 10:30, and that night, we really did have our own private holiday celebration. I waited to hear how her office party went, but Helen stayed unusually quiet about it. Not that I was eagerly anticipating every detail. I was already prepared to suggest she skip hers, just as she had encouraged me to avoid mine. That was my plan, at least, until I saw the dress she had picked out for the occasion. Holiday dresses are supposed to be festive, daring, maybe even a bit short. But this one, it redefined all three categories. You're not seriously thinking of wearing that dress on Saturday night, are you? I asked, trying to sound casual. What's wrong with my dress? I think it looks stunning on me, she replied with a hint of defiance. Sweetheart, I said carefully, that dress doesn't just say you're ready for a party, it screams it. Don't you have something a little more subtle? Oh, I see what this is, she shot back. You don't think I can pull off this dress. You think it's too young, too daring for me, don't you? Is that what you're saying? I hesitated, knowing I was treading on dangerous ground. Helen, in that dress, you'd look like someone who's trying too hard. For a holiday party on your own, it's just a bit much. Her expression turned icy. So now I look desperate. Is that it? No, that's not what I'm saying. It's just, well, wearing it with me is one thing, but for a work event, it feels out of place. I knew she wouldn't take my words well, and she didn't. The next few days, despite the December cheer, felt colder than the dead of winter. When Saturday rolled around, I watched as Helen got ready for her party. She moved around the room with practiced precision, and when she emerged from the bathroom fully dressed and made up, she looked absolutely breathtaking. That's when she noticed me slipping on my good suit. "Where are you going?" she asked, clearly confused. "With you to your party," I replied. "I thought you said you weren't coming this year." "Helen, do you honestly think I'd let you show up looking like that without an escort?" Her eyes narrowed. "You don't trust me, do you?" "It's not about trust," I said, meeting her gaze. "I just don't have a single reason to trust anyone else at that party." She shook her head, exasperated. "Fine, but when we get there, you're on your own." As we pulled into the Hilton Hotel, she looked so incredible I found myself wishing she'd just skip the party altogether. "Why don't we ditch this thing?" I suggested. "Let's grab a quiet dinner, head back home, and see where the night takes us." She wasn't having it. No second options were offered as we walked into the venue. Like every other corporate party I'd ever attended, the employees congregated in one area while spouses like me milled about aimlessly, nursing drinks and counting the minutes. I spotted Helen chatting with her colleagues, probably her close work friends, and after about an hour, I decided to mingle too. Most of the guys I met were just as bored as I was, though they were already several drinks deep from the open bar. I struck up conversations with a few of the wives, some of whom recognized Helen. One name kept coming up, Derek, her boss. From what I gathered, he wasn't exactly a beloved figure. Words like arrogant, egotistical, and even jerk were thrown around liberally. A few of the more creative descriptions painted him as slightly worse than societal trash and not much better than whale dung. Given the money they seemed to have splurged on this event, I expected the dinner to be at least halfway decent. Instead, it was a disappointment. The steak was mediocre, the marinated chicken tasted bland, and the blackened fish could have been outdone by a McDonald's Filet-O-Fish. Let's just say I wasn't exactly blown away. It seemed like most of the party budget had gone into keeping the bar open until midnight, or until the last employee hit the floor. I'd started the evening with a couple of cocktails, but after that, I stuck to walking around with a half-full glass of wine, more for appearances than anything else. "Enjoying yourself?" one of her company's executives asked as he approached me. I was about to respond, but he carried on before I could. "You're Helen's husband, right? She's one of our rising stars. Derek's been mentoring her personally, grooming her for a team leader role. You must be proud." He gave me a polite smile, waiting for my response. I forced a smile in return. "I am. Thank you," I said as he moved on to another group, probably to deliver the same rehearsed lines. "By the way, where is my promising star?" he asked, glancing around. I turned to look too, but Helen was nowhere in sight. With the last sips of my wine in hand, I set off to find her. The party sprawled across a large hall, the hotel lobby, and two adjoining suites. After 10 minutes of wandering down the corridors and glancing into various groups of tipsy employees, I still hadn't found her. Hoping for better luck, I stepped into one of the suites. Inside, it was exactly what you'd expect: loud laughter, overly drunk people, and a general lack of supervision. I could only hope someone was responsible enough to collect car keys. I was about to leave the room when I passed by the bathroom. As I leaned against the wall near the door, I froze. "Stop it. Control yourself. Mason is with me tonight," I heard Helen's voice say sharply. "I can't help it. You brought his sorry ass with you tonight," came the unmistakable reply of a man. "Helen, I booked us a room for later. I thought you said he wasn't coming." "That's not my fault," she hissed back. "He saw the dress I bought and wouldn't let me leave the house without him. Who does he think he is? Your lord and protector?" The man sneered. "Well, he's a bit late for that, isn't he?" came her icy reply, followed by his low laughter. My heart sank as I pieced together the situation. The muffled conversation continued, bits of it about me and something vague about getting rid of him. My drink was long forgotten in my hand. I wasn't drunk, but this was quickly becoming a night I'd regret. Nearby, an empty champagne bottle sat in an ice bucket. I grabbed it. Derek, because who else could it have been, was taller, heavier, and at least 8 years younger than me. If I was going to do something, it had to count. Helen walked out of the bathroom first, adjusting what she called a dress, but which now seemed more like an insult. She passed right by me without even noticing. Derek followed moments later. "Derek," I said, my voice cutting through the noise as he turned to look at me. He locked eyes with me and smiled, a smug, taunting grin. Bad move. I hid the bottle behind my back, deciding in that split second that his grin was the final straw. If he'd looked away, maybe things would have ended differently. But that look said it all. "I've had your wife, and there's nothing you can do about it." "Helen," I shouted, and she turned, startled, to see me standing there. What followed happened both too fast and in excruciating slow motion. The bottle struck Derek square on the side of his head. In the movies, bottles shatter into 1,000 pieces, and people collapse instantly. This wasn't the movies. The bottle didn't break, and while Derek stumbled, he didn't go down. What followed was chaos. I'd never been much of a fighter. In fact, the only fight I'd ever been in, back in elementary school, ended with me getting humiliated. But this time, I wasn't backing down. The next few minutes were a blur of punches and yelling. I managed to land a few good hits, even breaking his nose with a headbutt, before 5 burly guys managed to separate us. Derek spat blood and cursed at me, but I just smiled, a broken, victorious grin that only enraged him more. There was more yelling, more threats, before someone suggested it might be best if I left the party immediately. Helen stood nearby, her makeup streaked with tears. She looked at me with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Don't come home," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't care where you go, Mason. Just don't come back to the house." Before the hotel security guards escorted me out to the parking lot, I managed to tell Helen one last thing, though I'm not sure she even heard me. Nearly blind in one eye and still buzzing with adrenaline, I drove home slowly, every ache in my body a reminder of what had just happened. I parked in the garage, went straight to the fridge, and grabbed 4 ice packs and a cold Corona. Sitting on that damn bar stool, I alternated between icing my swollen hands, sipping the beer, and waiting for the inevitable call from the police. But the call never came. Maybe tomorrow, I thought. Definitely by Monday. Looking at my cold, red, battered hands, I realized my holiday vacation was shaping up to be anything but ordinary. Christmas was a week and a half away, and like always, I hadn't done any shopping yet. With the week off, though, that wouldn't be an issue, especially now that I was, for all intents and purposes, a single man. Reaching into my pocket, I felt the teeth. They were still there. Derek had accused me of assault, and when I told my lawyer the whole messy story, he made a few phone calls. Apparently, someone in upper management decided it wasn't worth associating the company's name with the incident. My lawyer assured them that if it came to it, he'd drag their reputation through the mud in the press. Scorned husband catches wife cheating at a company Christmas party, made for a headline they didn't want to see. Derek was a bastard, but he was their bastard. Helen called incessantly over the next week. I never answered. Our two sons spoke to her but refused to take her side. At least I'd raised them right. Everyone tried their best to make my holidays bright, but the atmosphere was heavy, like the lingering smell of something that had died. Christmas came and went. At her parents' house, a FedEx truck pulled up and the driver hurried to the door with a package. "For Helen Moore," he said, handing it to her mother. She signed for it, handed it to Helen, and said, "This is from Mason." Helen unwrapped the small package carefully. Inside was a black velvet ring box. Smiling faintly, she opened it and immediately dropped it to the floor. Two bloodied teeth bounced across the tile, stopping at her father's feet. He bent down, picked them up, slipped them into his pocket without a word, and walked away as Helen began sobbing. The divorce papers and a letter arrived the day after Christmas. Helen had hoped to convince me not to file, at least until she had the chance to talk to me, but that wasn't going to happen. She tore open the envelope and found a neatly typed letter inside. "Dear Helen, I hope you enjoyed your little Christmas gift. Derek certainly wouldn't have had the guts to give it to you himself. I'm just glad I could. Honestly, I don't even care why you did it anymore. Whatever your reasons were, they don't matter now. I just hope they were worth what you gave up. To avoid any misunderstandings, let me be clear. I fought Derek that night not to win you back. After what I heard and saw, we were over long before you walked out of that bathroom. What I did was entirely for me. Sure, I could have just walked away, divorced you quietly, and been done with it. But Derek would have walked away unscathed, and that wasn't something I could let happen. He's a tough bastard, tougher than I expected. I thought the bottle would take him down for good, but in hindsight, I'm almost glad it didn't. It hurts that they threw me out that night, but at least he knows someone finally stood up to him. I understand Derek lost his job, but you only got a demotion. Looks like you left quite the impression on upper management. Maybe one of them will take you under their wing now, just like Derek did. I'm sure your co-workers have come up with a few new nicknames for you. The adulteress and the housewife are probably the nicest ones I can think of. Please, just sign the divorce papers so we can put this mess behind us. You'll keep what you have, I'll keep what's mine, and we'll sell the house. It's too big for me anyway, and it'll always remind me of what we lost. I've told our sons the truth about what you did. I'm sorry for that, but they deserve honesty. They'll decide for themselves how much respect you're still owed. I wish I could end this by saying I wish you the best, but that would be a lie. I hope you live long enough to regret what you've done, and when our friends ask me what happened, I'll tell them exactly what you did. You can explain yourself to them if they still want to hear it. Your soon-to-be ex-husband, Mason." My lawyer received the signed papers on New Year's Eve. Starting the new year with a clean slate felt like the only good thing to come out of it all. I heard that Helen quit her job and disappeared a month later, but I never asked where she went. I figured my sons would tell me eventually. Some friends and family thought I was foolish to throw away a 25-year marriage over an affair, especially one I'd already avenged. When they questioned me about it, I'd look them straight in the eye and ask, "Would you lend me your wife for a weekend?" They'd react with horror every time. "Are you out of your mind?" they'd say. I'd nod knowingly and let them stew in their discomfort. Only one friend encouraged me, but his wife was 74, hard of hearing, and used a walker. We both laughed, but I told him I'd pass. Whenever I hear stories about men who quietly accept betrayal, I glance at my scarred knuckles. Yeah, it was worth it, and I'd do it all over again, without hesitation. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel. Bye.